everybody, welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan, and it's been a minute since we chatted because I had some stuff going on and I couldn't get an episode out in time, and so I had to do some rescheduling and all that good stuff. But I'm back, and I'm back with a really awesome guest who I'm super excited to talk with you all about their book, and that is Steele Alexandra Douris. And the book is Spirits, Seers, and Seances, Victorian Spiritualism and Magic of and the Supernatural. It's was such a good book, but still welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on.
And I hope I didn't butcher your last name. I'm terrible with people's last names. I butcher everybody's.
Oh no, Doris, it's perfect. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. The book was absolutely fantastic. It was like a combination of getting to listen to a witchcraft book because I also got it on Audible so I could, read it very quickly and get through it as well as my neurodivergent brain would understand. But the book is also beautiful if you want a hard copy of it. But yeah, the book was fantastic. It was like getting to read a witchcraft book mixed with a history book mixed with like a spot of literature. It was so fantastic, and it was just I loved every second of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was trying to bring a lot of different sort of angles to the material, and so it was sort of a complicated process kind of editing it down to its final form because there were so many different angles I was approaching things from. But yeah, but it's great to hear that a lot of people have been enjoying it. That's been great.
I mean, the coolest thing about it was I didn't realize how much spiritualism had impacted a lot of the literary world. That was really cool for me, as somebody with an English degree. I was like, I didn't know that, especially about like Arthur Conan Doyle. I had no idea he was a spiritualist. No clue.
Oh yeah.
So that was cool. Anybody who's a Sherlock Holmes fan, Arthur Conan Doyle was apparently a spiritualist and very big into it and wrote two books about it. Which you'll read all about that in the book once you read the book. But the book was so good and so fantastic, and it touched on so many of the things that I think when it comes to spirit communication and how we do, I guess you could say modern mediumship. Some of those
Mhm.
things kind of get overlooked a little bit in, terms of like automatic writing and automatic drawing. A lot of people want to immediately reach for channeling or they want to reach for modern devices such as like spirit boxes and those kinds of things. And I think that those older techniques kind of are overlooked. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting. The book, one of my one of the sort of seeds for the book was actually when I was teaching a class. I'm a grad student, so I was teaching an English lit class about the influence of Victorian spiritualism on the genre of the Victorian ghost story because as I write about in the book, the Victorians adored ghost stories. It was like the
Hmm.
heyday of the ghost story. And so I was talking to my class about some of the techniques, it was sort of a cultural background and some of the techniques that the spiritualists were using. And one of the students in the class who I think was sort of had her own kind of interest in like Wicca and, modern kind of alternative spiritualities, she was saying like some of this is like quite similar to what I've heard people, talk about now. It was one of those really interesting moments where I think like, the past seemed like on one hand it seemed so similar to what we do now and on the other hand obviously so different in so many other ways. And so I think part of what I was trying to capture with the book was, you know, so many things have changed, but so many of the sort of core principles and practices are still there. And with automatic writing in particular, I think something that was really interesting to me when I was doing research specifically on automatic writing, um, is really, there's a lot of conversations now around like spirit boards. A lot of people have very strong feelings about spirit boards. But when I
Yes,
was
they do.
researching, yes, they sure do. But when I was researching kind of the history of planchettes, and I actually wrote a short article about this for Llewellyn. Uh, but um, the planchette really evolved. All it was, we had planchettes. Basically, the spiritualists were using planchettes before they were using spirit boards. And all it was a way for people to automatically write in groups. So it was originally sort of like what we would think of as the heart shaped pointer
Hmm.
that you would use on a spirit board. But it had a pencil attached to it. And so rather than using it on a board, they would just free write on paper. So basically, um, it evolved as a way for people who were really interested in automatic writing independently. They could automatic write together in a circle. And then it was sometime, some decades after that, that the planchette sort of got repurposed. They took the pencil off and they added like a board with letters on it. That's kind of the modern spirit board that we see now. But it was really a very kind of smooth evolution from like individuals writing, just with pens and pencils themselves, automatic
Hmm.
writing for their own purposes, to everyone sort of automatic writing in a circle with a planchette with a pencil. And then ultimately, like the spirit boards we have now. And I thought it was really interesting because a lot of the people who have really strong feelings about spirit boards now don't necessarily have the same strong feelings if you told them you were going to like practice, that someone's going to practice automatic writing just with a pencil and a notebook. They wouldn't necessarily have such a strong reaction. But the spirit board prompts this really strong reaction. But ultimately, like one practice just grew out of the other, and it's functionally, I think, really the same idea in a lot of ways.
I think that's super cool, and it was really fun reading about that different type of planchette in the book because I didn't know that that was one of the original forms of the planchette. I knew of Victorian spiritualism, but like I didn't know much. So it was really nice to kind of have like this crash course throughout the book of learning about it and learning about the history and everything and the evolution of it. It was really interesting. But the I kind of like want to go see if I can hunt down one of those original style planchettes now because I'm like, that would be a fun kind of thing to see if that could be done even individually. Um,
Yeah.
and see if that would still be, a viable source of spirit communication even today. So I think that would be just super fascinating. I plan on bringing that up with my coven and be like, hey, we should try this and see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, well, and it also allows for automatic drawing, which is something I talk about a bit
Yeah.
less in the book, but that was also something that there were some spiritualists who also were artists, and they were very interested in like automatic drawing and automatic painting, and that's not something that like the spirit boards that we have now allows for at all, right? It's really just an alphabet system. So, yeah,
Mhm.
so that's something else that's really cool about the pencil planchette.
And I think it's so funny kind of seeing how there's such this visceral reaction towards spirit boards and all that, that obviously comes out of the demonization of them through the Christian church and all that,
Yeah.
and how they're associated with very negative entities. And, we see the same stuff with tarot cards and those kind of
Yeah.
associations. But it's really fun to kind of see also the origins of that because when you think back to, for example, tarot is even mentioned in some of the original versions of the Bible and fortune
Yeah.
telling. So it's really cool, but it was so interesting kind of looking at all the different aspects of it throughout the book. And for me, I think that probably one of the most exciting things was how excited everybody was to talk to the dead back
Oh,
then.
yeah.
When everybody was obsessed with it and they're it's like the weekly seance party and it's like, you guys just want to go sit down and talk to the dead for fun? Like,
Yeah.
really? Okay. And now, like you mentioned, those kinds of things in modern time, and people are kind of wary about that. They're like, I don't know. And you think
Yeah.
back, and it's like, yeah, that was a weekly occurrence. We just did that for fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that really made me want to write this specific book was when I was doing archival research for actually my like academic research. I had no idea like how prolific the spiritualists were in terms of the pamphlets and the journal articles and I mean there were so many spiritualist publications like Medium and Daybreak. They were publishing regularly for decades. I mean just like a Medium and Daybreak, which is one of the big spiritualist papers. I mean, massive archive, so much in there, totally unwieldy. And so when I was going through there and I was just seeing, I feel like so much of what we see now in media when we see like Victorian spiritualism, it's all focused on like a dramatic seance at a dramatic moment in a plot. Like if you think about like the Penny Dreadful TV series or a lot of the media we have now that engages with spiritualism or Victorian spiritualism, there's frequently
Hmm.
like one dramatic seance at a key moment where something happens. But for them, it really was like it was just standard practice at the end of all of these, spiritualist papers and periodicals. They would list like circles that were meeting regularly, like what nights they met, so that you could go. because they were like weekly occurrences. It was like the
Yeah.
weekly like quilting group or something, and I had just never really had exposure before I started doing research to that aspect of it, where it's like this regular part of people's lives. Um, so that was something that just really made me want to write the book as well.
I love that, and I love that it, brings about a history that I don't think that at least personally me in school, I was not taught about how big the spiritualistic movement was. I mean, we knew of it, but it was never such a big thing. And then when you start looking at all of the different people and the creators and all the people that were so deeply invested in spiritualism during that time period, it's like this touched everything.
Yeah.
Everyone in their own way, and it I feel like it was just really overlooked, and that might be in part, again, to the, stigmatization of, modern spiritualism, and, it's like, well, we don't wanna teach people about that history because, oh, we might, start stirring up another spiritualist movement if we do.
Yeah.
So, um, out of all the different techniques in the book that you wrote about, and obviously there's a plethora of them, what would you say is the one that you could see, you know, really being revitalized from that time period? Obviously we still have like automatic writing and stuff like that nowadays, and we still utilize that, just not as frequently. But what would you say would probably be the one that you would like to kind of see be revisited in the modern era?
That's interesting because I can include a lot of different kinds of some of them are like spiritual practices and some of them are like
Mhm.
ways to celebrate the holidays. I think a couple people had mentioned who have read the book that they liked that I included like how to read a standard deck of playing cards the Victorian way
Oh, yeah,
in the
that was
book,
very interesting. Yeah, that was super
which I
interesting.
yeah, which I think is it's useful. I mean, I'm pretty attached. I love tarot. I love tarot system. So I'm pretty attached to tarot, but I think the simplicity of that system is, it lacks, as I say in the book, some of the like, kind of psychological complexity that we now associate with tarot. We have so many
Mhm.
books about the interpretation of tarot, but I think it's like a fun, easy system in a way. And so I think it would be really interesting. To see people who are really well versed in tarot kind of experiment with that or just hear their take on that essentially. Let's see what else. Um, I mean, I definitely like I'm not these aren't really spiritual practices, but I think a lot of the ways of celebrating Halloween in particular were just
Mhm.
very creative. They had to rely on a lot of DIY, like the tableau. I definitely think we need to bring back like tableau vivant in general.
Right?
I think it just seems so fun.
I also like the trick or treats things with the nuts. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, they have to be very DIY, which
Yeah.
I love that kind of like the other thing I will say that just for me I was really kind of like excited to include in the book was in the crystal reading. It's in the crystal reading section. So at
Mhm.
the end of what chapter would that be? Chapter 8. Um I was able to include like from Borderlands, which is my favorite spiritualist publication. It only ran for about 4 years, but I just adore it. They had actual instructions for how to get started with crystal gazing. And I basically include it like almost verbatim in the book. I make some adjustments just for the language. But I was really surprised when I read it for the first time because I just felt like it was so, minus the Victorian language, which I sort of smoothed out. It felt like it could be in a Llewellyn book now.
Mhm. It does,
um,
yeah. I mean, obviously it is because it's in
yeah,
books.
now it is. so um so I was really excited to be able to include that because a lot of the other there were a lot of instructions on how to do things in a group because obviously a lot of spiritualist practice was very like collaborative, group oriented, community oriented. But I was very interested in some of these like individual practices as well. And I thought that crystal gazing practice was like this sort of training of like the visual part of your mind. I found that, just really fascinating to have that from like 130 years ago. So,
That was super cool, and it was really nice to kinda see that because I don't think that crystal gazing is I think as a practice as a whole, it is like talked about in an overview, but I've never seen like an in-depth thing until like your book of like, here's how you do it, here's what you need, kind of thing. Like I and maybe it's also because I don't read a whole lot of crystal books. So if anybody listening, if there is a book out there that kind of goes into deeper detail, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know about it. But from my knowledge and my experience and the books that I have read, I have not seen one that really delved deep into that. So I thought that was really interesting and fascinating. And it's cool that you were able to revitalize something that was, has long been gone and bring it back into your book and kind of introduce it into the modern era. So I think that was really fascinating. My other part that I like squeed with excitement when I was reading the book was how deep the investigative side and how deep you went into Jack the Ripper. Like I love Jack the Ripper. I
Oh
love
yeah.
all the lore about
Yeah.
him. And this it was just so fascinating to see how it blended into the spiritualistic movement and how
Yeah.
they were trying to use, spiritualism and seances and, communication to help find him. And
Yeah.
I was just like, "Oh my god, that's so awesome."
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I work on outside of this book, a lot of my academic work. I work a lot on sort of Victorian crime fiction, popular fiction, it's like detective fiction, sensation fiction, and I look at like crime in Victorian popular fiction in novels, and then also how they talked about crime, like actual crimes in the newspapers. And so that was also a lot of my kind of like other research interests bleeding in, where I'm just so fascinated by like the 19th century was such a fascinating time for like newspapers and reporting on all kinds of things, but I especially look at crime a lot. Crime and spiritualism are two of my big things. So being able to sort of include that and see this transition, like this really strong connection between how they talk about investigation, like criminal investigations in the newspapers, and then how the spiritualists identify themselves as investigators, and they see themselves as like investigating the other realm. And then the spiritualists are always being investigated because people are always trying to figure out, people are always trying to either debunk them or prove what they're doing. So, and then also you have the spiritualists sometimes trying to actually use these different investigative methods for crime, to actually solve
Mhm.
crime. And all of this is happening while, detective fiction is kind of because, detective fiction is something we get in that latter half of the 19th century. We didn't really have detective fiction as we would think of it now before then. And so it's all sort of happening at the same time. And you even have all these weird connections, like Doyle, who is this like ardent spiritualist, but then he's the author of Sherlock Holmes. And so it's really, yeah, I got to have a lot of fun with some of the investigation like sections in the book.
I think that that's, such a really fun and fascinating thing to also see how, throughout the book you kind of show the also progression of spiritualism throughout that time period and
Yeah.
to see how it changed and how it, molded to fit the times and all that. And you see this investigation. And it's interesting though, because you see the correlations of people trying to debunk and disprove the spiritualists. And we see that even now into modern day where, paranormal investigators and spiritualists, I say spiritualists loosely, it's probably closer to
Yeah.
mediums. But you see them also being debunked because people want that hard fact truth. And you're trying to basically, prove that the spirit world exists, but the spirit world also is basically almost like an alternate dimension that you're just like, yeah, we're trying to prove it, but we're not doing a good job because we don't have all the technology to meet there yet. And so when you have those moments, they're like, no, that picture's fake. No, that voice audio is fake, or that's done, or you did this, or, and my heart kind of went out to all the people that were the spiritualists that were having these parties that, were getting debunked or even arrested. Like that was a thing I
Yeah.
didn't realize was illegal. Yeah, apparently back in that time you could be arrested for reading cards. Who knew? Um,
Yeah.
so it's a really fascinating thing to see how well, you know, everything has continued to progress and change, but some things still remain the same. And,
Yeah.
I think as people were still trying to find those spiritual answers out there. And I don't know, I hope one day that we can, prove everything. That would be really cool. But at the same time, it would also kind of take the fun out of the mystery of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's something that's just, it's interesting because for me personally, a lot of times, for me, a lot of times spirituality and art, they kind of go together and they're not
Mhm.
really a scientific thing for me, which is funny because the spiritualists who I'm writing about, they were like, we are going to use science to explain everything. Like, we are going to categorize all of the spirits. Um, and so, but for the spiritualists, it was definitely like they really saw themselves as just working on this intersection of science and religion, science and spirituality, and they were so fascinated by that intersection, and that intersection was really important to them. Um, and that's like you say, I mean, we still have, y- you know, I think of all the things that I think the spiritualist movement kind of gave to us that we inherited from them, which I talk about throughout the book. That
Mhm.
sense of like the value of investigation and the importance of investigation and the centralizing of investigation is probably just the most significant one that again we still see. You see it less in you know circles like Wicca or certain witchcraft circles where for people it's much more like a spiritual practice and proving or disproving is not necessarily like an important value in that practice. But in as you say like paranormal investigative TV shows and things like that, that question of proof and of using technology especially to capture proof and is like a really important part of like the culture that's built up around all of that. And that's all Victorian.
That's all Victorian. And kind of bringing it back to like the automatic writing thing, it was interesting when the first time I was introduced to automatic writing was actually through a paranormal TV show. I want to say it was the Hoser Files. Through Cindy Kaza, the medium on the show, she used automatic writing, and I believe she also does automatic drawing as well. But like, I was just like, what is she doing? What? You can communicate through writing? That's a thing? I was completely dumbfounded when I watched this whole thing, and then, of course, I dove a little bit deeper into it, and I was like, "Oh, this is an actual thing." And getting to learn how important those kind of aspects were during the spiritualist movement was really fascinating as well, because I really do love the historical aspects of it and seeing how everything has evolved throughout the times. And then also seeing how some things just never change and
Yeah.
how we're still able to revitalize those old skills and bring them into a modern era where they still can apply, even in a world full of technology where we have mini computers attached to our hands almost 24 hours a day and
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So I thought that was really awesome. I mean, there's so much fascinating work throughout this and, bringing about the education about how especially women who were spiritualists and how they were treated and those kinds of things throughout the book. Just everybody, I'm going to just stop gushing about the book and tell you to go buy it and read it because it's awesome and I loved it and I will highly recommend it from now on to everyone, especially if you're interested in that. So, you also are have you finished your PhD or are you still working on it?
I'm still working on it.
Ugh, I feel you. I'm so sorry you have to continue working on it.
It's been a long time coming. I should be in the final few months at this point. So
Good.
the book was like a massive detour from the dissertation. But I'm wrapping up the dissertation hopefully quite soon. And I'm excited to do that.
Are there any more books in the future that you're thinking of? Whether they're of this kind of variety or a fiction variety or any of those kinds of things?
Probably, yeah. So, I have one or two possible nonfiction projects that I've sort of started working on, but they're not I haven't necessarily seriously committed to them at this point. So,
That's fair.
and then I definitely want to, when the dissertation is done, I definitely want to write a historical fiction or historical fantasy set in the Victorian era. I've done all this research and normally that's something that, like the process of writing historical fiction, sometimes you have so much research you have to do
Mhm.
beforehand. It can be sort of daunting, but I've already done so much research. I'm like, it's the perfect time. Like, finish the dissertation. And before you forget everything you've researched, like
Right?
make
Oh god,
make
isn't that a
fiction happen.
mood? It's like, "Hey, yeah, I know you're working on this other thing, but remember that all that research you did? You might wanna use it before we have to,
Yeah.
like, put it in the backlog of things you have to try to remember."
Yeah, exactly. If I give it too many years, I'll have to read my own book to remember like what I so I'm gonna try to avoid that and hopefully do a novel.
Oh, that's totally fair. That's completely fair. So my next question is, do you have any book signings coming up? Maybe, maybe not, given the fact that you're, knee deep in a dissertation.
Not so far. I might be doing some right now. I'm based in I'm sort of dissertating from afar. So right now I'm based in San Antonio, Texas, and there is a local witchy shop that I might be having an event at.
Oh, cool.
But we shall see. I'm sort of still trying to figure out the scheduling for that. But right now, no hard and fast dates for anything at this point.
Okay, completely fair, completely fair. I also know the world is crazy and it's hard to nail down dates for those kinds of
Yeah.
things. So, um, my next question is, if people want to connect with you on social media, where would they be able to find you to do that?
They will find me. I'm probably most active. Everywhere's a little quiet right now because of the other things I have going on, but I'm probably most active on Instagram. So my handle pretty much anywhere I am is at Steele Arcana. So SteeleArcana, rather than my whole name, which is just too long. So at Steele Arcana. I'm on Instagram. I have a page on Facebook. I'm planning to be much more active on these. I would like to start putting out more videos and things like that, talking about things that I talk about in the book and other topics. But there will be like a bit of a delay as I wrap up, like finally finish the dissertation. But then I'm hoping to be a lot more active. So Instagram, in the future, the Facebook page hopefully will be more active. Twitter and I are taking a break from each other, so I have a
Oh, I
Twitter
love
account,
Twitter.
but
Twitter and I are done. We broke up.
yeah, we're on a break, but it may become a permanent one. So, but Instagram and Facebook, and maybe at some point TikTok, that would be exciting.
TikTok is fun. I will admit TikTok is where I spend most of my time these days. But yeah, TikTok is probably it's awesome. It's difficult to get started. I will warn you there.
Yeah,
Once you kind of get that learning curve and kind of figure it out a little bit, then you're just like, oh, okay. But if you're making videos on Instagram, then you should be able to, transition pretty easily over to TikTok. I wasn't. Just posting photos because I'm old. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. And everybody, make sure you go pick up a copy of Steele's book. There will be a link in the show description. All the links to Steele's social media will also be in the show description. Just, go follow, go get a copy of the book. If you are unable to afford a copy of the book, make sure you go request one at your local library. If they do not have one in stock, they will order one or find one from another library to get it to you. But obviously, support your local libraries because they are good for your community, they're good for the economy, they're good for everybody.
yeah,
So just,
yeah.
do that. And take care of yourselves. Be kind to each other. And I will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.